with Jake Tapper, today at 4 on CNN.
How are the voters who swung the election for President Trump feeling about his first few weeks in office? Our friends at Engages talked to some Arizona voters who switched from voting for Joe Biden in 2020 to Trump in 2024, and so far, they mostly like what they see.
I just think he's trying to get America back on track as quickly as possible, given the state that it was left in from the previous administration.
It feels more merit and transparency that I'm getting from the administration so far.
I approve of a lot of the stuff that he's doing with the border and everything.
He's put other countries on notice that were to be taken seriously.
For the most part, I feel like he's on the right track by keeping transgenders out of women's sports. That's number one.
All 11 Biden-Trump voters say they approve of Donald Trump's first weeks in office. My panel is back now. What do you make of that, Dave Weigel? I know that you spent a lot of time before the election talking to voters who were perhaps on the cusp of this.
Yes, and even before the election, you could tell things that outraged every Democrat weren't necessarily outraging most voters. This is also the normal time frame for a presidential honeymoon. If we were having this conversation 4 years ago, I was talking to Republicans who were worried that Joe Biden wasn't very visible. He was older, but what was the thing that was going to make him unpopular? Because he seemed to be at a baseline, and then they found it, which was Afghanistan. But the confidence that these voters have, and these were people that the Harris campaign could tell were not gettable by October. This is what a lot of these plays are being run on. If you polling on how much of people think foreign aid is a part of the federal budget, overstates it usually by factor of 30. And so the fights they've taken with the highest profile, this is when I talk about what Democrats are trying to focus on, what they think the media might catch on to, what voters might catch on to. They are worried about the foreign aid component. If it looks like they're complaining about money going elsewhere, or getting into the gender and sports stuff, it looks like Democrats are too concerned with one of those issues. Their default is, well, Trump is acting because these guys were too weak to do what I believed in the first place.
What we are seeing right now is what Donald Trump campaigned on.
Right.
We've said that umpteen times now in the past 4 weeks. What he didn't campaign on was the Elon Musk of it all. That Elon Musk would be going in and the person with his team doing this at the pace with which they are moving. I want you to listen to what Jonas G., he is one of those Biden to Trump voters, said about that. Doesn't seem that concerned.
He's moving fast to dismantle the corruption, which there's so much of it. Everywhere he turns, there's stuff that they have to take out. Went to one agency, and what, 80%, 90% of that agency's been spending stuff that nobody would approve of.
I want you to talk about that, Isaac, but then just that last part, 80 to 90% of the agency spending stuff nobody would approve of. We don't know that because there's no accountability. Maybe at the end of the day, once we can actually look at it, perhaps that's going to be right. But we have no idea, which also speaks to the fact that there is such a fractured media consumption environment that is getting even more so. We don't know. I mean, Jonas G. is listening to, they said at the beginning, some mainstream media. But who knows where this information is coming from?
Yeah, and that's part of the problem that we're dealing with the current information ecosystem going on. But the problem that those who are fighting back against these cuts, including Democrats, have is that I would say many people, maybe an overwhelming majority of people around this country, have some sense that government is at least a little bit bloated, that there's extra spending, things that can be cut. There are all sorts of stories that come up all across the spectrum. And what happened here is that Elon Musk moved quickly. And so you're asking voters to say the thing that you think should be dealt with as a problem is being dealt with quickly. The question, again, as we were saying earlier, is how these cuts are being made, who's making them, and what the actual effect of them will be. But look, for Democrats, this is really hard because they're also, in addition to the stuff that Dave was talking about, they're struggling with the fact that they're saying constitutional crisis. You asked Amy Klobuchar, constitutional crisis. There is a constitutional issue of the executive taking power, right? But that seems like in the weeds.
Well, except, it does, except you brought me to my next voter, which thank you very much for that. Courtney L. Was asked about the question of whether or not it's okay for this guy she voted for to defy the courts.
I'm very torn on this because at the end of the day, I agree we need the Constitution and we need rules and procedures. But at the same time, how are we going to make big changes if someone like Trump being unconventional, we need him to be doing these things, to be making these executive orders and making these big changes for big changes to happen. So I'm very torn on the issue.
Well, I mean, and this is what is, driving the Trump administration right now. They are hearing these voters who are like, move fast, and the whole tech sector thing, move fast, break things. Mm-hmm. The problem with that is that when you break things, eventually, you'll step on some glass or something like that. Like the thing that they're doing right now, and I do agree that there is this lag, right? Like you don't know what's going to impact people. You can drive 100 miles per hour on the highway, and you can do that many times and get there faster. But eventually there may be a wreck, right? Like, and that is what we're dealing with. Like, is there going to be a wreck? I'm not a psychic, but there could be a wreck.
I want to just play one more because it speaks to what you were mentioning earlier about flooding the zone, seeing the president all the time, every day, multiple times a day, which could not be more different from Joe Biden. And the question is whether that's what these voters wanted.
He said he was going to do this, 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 and this, and this is what he's starting to get done.
And he only has 4 years to do it. It's not like he can run again. He already did his first term. So some of these things you can't fix overnight. So he has to get started early on. He has 4 years, and he made promises in his campaign. He won because of those promises. So he's getting to work.
Yeah, and I was also struck in other clips, and I've heard this as voters, of the term transparency to describe Donald Trump and Elon Musk going on camera and talking. Somebody might be looking at their statements and say, but what he just said wasn't true. We've fact-checked it. He's counter something that his own administration said an hour earlier. Doesn't matter if the president's saying it, it sounds transparent. The other word I'm not hearing is Congress. And there is this assumption in these focus groups, the Congress that you're not hearing from isn't able to act. I heard Democrats on the top of the constitutional crisis say, come to Congress, pass a bill. And that just seems so yesterday for the voters that we're hearing about that assume, assume Congress won't act. Two, listen to Mike Johnson and they can tell they're supine and they don't want to act.
I have a story up on our site yesterday about what Democrats are doing. And I asked Hakeem Jeffries, Democratic leader in the House, in reporting it last week, I said, what do you say to Democrats who have given up hope? Yeah. And he said, keep hope alive. Listen, the courts are ruling against him. His polls are going down, not up, and he's going to have to deal with Congress. The courts have started to rule against him in some ways, but also some toward him. His polls are not going down, right? And that is the thing that all the Trump opponents have to run up against. It may change when they get to this budget showdown next month. But for the moment, because of the honeymoon, because of all these other things, there is not the kind of resistance to Trump and what he's doing that a lot of Democrats were hoping there would be.
Isaac, that's you're very prolific. That's one of the stories you have on CNN.com. Up next, we're going to talk about another story that Isaac has been reporting on, and that is the New York City mayor's race. Eric Adams, can he survive with increasingly antagonistic Democratic colleagues up there? What about Andrew Cuomo? Will he jump in? Stay with us.